So this is the first session in our Roadmap to Reflective Teaching series. We want to thank you for attending. We're going to go ahead and put the details for sessions 2 and 3 in the chat for you shortly. And while this subject can be a little bit more of a personal nature, we've limited the amount of times we'll ask you to publicly participate and contribute. So for our regulars, you know this is not our jam, but most of our activities will include some individual writing activities. However, if you feel inclined to share, we invite you to contribute where and how you're comfortable doing so. So showing on your screen, you're going to find the learning objectives for today's session. So we're going to discuss reflective teaching as a practice, as well as some of the benefits. We will then review a few metacognitive activities that can help you articulate how you currently approach your teaching methods, and perhaps explore why you've chosen those strategies. We will also practice this by providing you a handout that has several open-ended questions. During this independent writing exercise, we're going to ask you to explore your current teaching practices and really think about the why behind your teaching, really kind of tease that out. You can capture this by describing what's happening now. How do you conduct your teaching activities? And why have you made those instructional choices? This will be a really good starting point for you to take that next step into creating your teaching philosophy statement, or TPS for short. Now, if you've already created a teaching philosophy statement, this is a great time to check in with yourself. Have you made any changes that should be reflected in your TPS? Is everything still in alignment with your beliefs about teaching and learning? So when it's time, my colleagues will put a link to the handout in the Zoom chat. We're going to ask you to address each question and then think about how you could adapt those reflections into a TPS. And we're going to show you some practical examples to do that from other health science educators. Now, we invite you to engage with us in the Zoom chat. Those nonverbal icons are a great way to do that, like the raise your hand feature or any of the thumbs up features. We're going to share a link to that as well if you've never done that before. So during this series, you're going to hear us focus on the process of reflective teaching. While we may bounce back and forth between reflective teaching and a teaching philosophy statement, we want to be very clear that the teaching philosophy statement can be an artifact of this process. It's something concrete that can be shared externally. Now, I've explained for our intention for today, and in this session, we're going to consider different data points. I've explained our intention for today. In our next session, we're going to explore those different data points that you can think about how to use what you're doing, and are those meeting your goals? And then lastly, we're going to focus on having you think about taking the next step, looking through that data and your self-reflections to inform an action plan that you might use moving forward. So let's first be clear about what we mean by reflective teaching. This is when an educator examines their own teaching and they review the how and the why they're approaching their teaching the way that they're doing it. This practice requires critical reflection, and it asks us to think about those underlying beliefs about our teaching and learning. However, to get the most out of this exercise, the process of reflection should be repetitive. It's not something that should be a one and done exercise. It's important to return to it and evaluate if and when we make changes, because we're always making changes. And that reflective teaching, it's a really great way to evaluate your own teaching and also consider the effect that our teaching is having on our students' learning process. This allows us time and space to think about, if we need to make any improvements, and then later assess if those changes or our choices produce the results that we anticipated. So as you repeat this process, you will start to visualize and appreciate your own evolution as an educator. You'll also be able to see themes and important topics emerge. The next possible step would be to use those specific examples and any convictions you feel about your teaching and adapt that into a narrative that tells a story about who you are as an educator. So if reflective teaching is when an educator examines their own teaching, you could consider a teaching philosophy the vehicle for that critical reflection to take place. This is typically a 1 to 2 page document, and it describes and explains your core beliefs and the values regarding teaching and learning. It's designed to be a living document that contains concrete examples of how your teaching philosophy translates to your educational setting. Creating a TPS is something that all educators should care about. And while it's true that many academic positions in universities require it for maybe hiring or during the process of evaluation or for promotion, the more meaningful reason to create a TPS is that this tool allows you to hone your craft as an educator. You'll gain really incredible insights about your own beliefs about instruction by capturing it, what you're doing from multiple angles and different sources. Perhaps you're doing that by gathering feedback from your students or your peers, or you're looking into the data from your students' learning performance. The process of doing this reflection also helps you actively monitor your progress and assess instruction. Your audience, if you were to hand them your TPS after reading it, should leave with an understanding of who you are as an educator and what it is that you believe facilitates learning. So adding reflection to your routine, it's going to take a ton of time. I'm asking you to add a ton more work, right? Well, not quite. The process of reflecting is something that we do on a daily basis, whether we're aware of it or not. An everyday example might be deciding how we best use our time. We are all continuously reflecting on how we spend and use our time. And this process of reflection will help us prioritize our responsibilities. So the same thing applies here. My question is, have you developed a system to improve how you think about and evaluate your own teaching? If you have, kudos to you. But if you haven't, if you have, kudos to you, but is it repeatable and is it sustainable? If it takes hours and hours and so much time, you're probably not likely to repeat it. So that's not maybe going to be the best approach. Do you take the time to articulate your beliefs and practices? And if your answer is no, why not? So if I were to ask you to sit down and reflect and maybe get started on writing a TPS, what might be the reaction I receive? I have a feeling that quite a few of you might feel like this person right here. It may feel time-consuming. It might feel unnecessary or overwhelming, or perhaps you don't feel like you have enough experience, skills, or the right type of experience to even complete the activity independently. Both the fascinating and challenging part of creating a TPS is how much latitude you actually have to create it and personalize it. And there are some common components that are expected, but this activity is really a chance to be creative. So the word cloud currently showing in your screen was generated from keywords used in an example teaching philosophy statement. This snapshot, I think, is very interesting. I'm going to show you why. I'm honing in on words like guiding or collaborative. It really starts for me to paint a picture of who this person is and what it is they believe. Now, the lack of uniformity can make the process of creating your own maybe feel abstract or vague, like you haven't been given the proper tools, or maybe you don't have the right idea of how to actually physically do it. Luckily, it doesn't have to be an overwhelming task. We can actually start small and complete chunked activities. Now, I think I can safely assume you're here because of your dedication and pursuit to being a lifelong learner. And we know that when we want to improve at something, we have to know where we're starting. We need to take inventory from time to time. So you might first consider, what you're currently doing to be able to bridge the gap between what you're doing now and what you hope to achieve. You might also anchor that reflection by exploring your motivation, the why behind your choices. And that can later be used to ground yourself when you run into obstacles or to check in that your choice is still aligned to your beliefs. So next, we're going to show a few activities for capturing what you're currently doing in your teaching and prompt you to think about if those activities are in alignment. But ultimately, these are just suggestions. You need to find what works best for you. And remember, don't be afraid to change your mind or to try something new if what you're finding is just not working. So you might feel stuck right from the start, right? You might be drawing a blank when you think about answering questions like, what do you believe about teaching? What are the qualities or characteristics that you gravitate towards? You might try telling a story. Sometimes if we're finding it challenging to write about ourselves, we should first try to focus on someone else. It could help get the ideas flowing. So close your eyes and think about the great teachers that inspired you. Maybe someone who has influenced you in the way that you approach your teaching and learning? Do you emulate that in your own teaching? What about that example was so striking, or what maybe were those qualities? So thinking through this, let's go through a couple that I thought through. So maybe thoughtful, I saw that one come up. Maybe a really deep amount of subject knowledge. Maybe they're a really great content expert. Maybe they value being collaborative, or perhaps they really encourage discovery during our class sessions. But this list, it could be anything and everything. I have a whole list of like 20 different ones. These are just a couple that I pulled out. So maybe you've got that down, but maybe you're struggling to see which activities really made a difference in your teaching. One activity you might try is to capture what you did in a scatter plot. And this can be done really quickly, as it's pretty simple. You can draw 2 lines similar to what you see on your screen and capture what it is that's happening now. You grab a sticky note, you record it electronically, and you capture what teaching methods or activities that you find yourself using most often. The next thing we're going to do, once we've got it all captured, we're going to start looking for themes or for groups that those similar approaches fall under. For example, group work is a much more collaborative approach, while goal setting is typically an individual activity that falls under metacognition or intentionally thinking about how you think and you learn. And these themes become important if and when you decide to take that next step in creating your own philosophy statement. So now that we've identified some characteristics we gravitate towards, and we've documented some of our favorite teaching methods, you might next turn to the literature to help you find that intersection between what you aspire to do and what it is you're currently doing. Now, we're not going to get too much into the models here in this session, but I'd like to share an excerpt from a CPS example from another medical educator. This faculty member chose to ground their own personal beliefs about learning on constructivist theory. And this is a theory based on the idea that learners build on their existing foundation to learn new information. And I think this illustrates how you could take the characteristics from the story activity. So if you've noticed, our person believed in collaboration, see here, not competition, working in teams, right? You might discover the major arching themes, again, tend to gravitate more towards collaborative or group activities. So you've taken what it is you actually do, you've taken what you believe in, what you are trying to emulate from the teachers that you admire, and then you create a narrative similar to the one that's showing on your screen to articulate what it is you believe. And then if you'll see on the bottom right-hand side, we've given you some examples and references that you can refer back to later, as well as putting some of those in the chat. Okay, so next we're going to have the opportunity to individually reflect on our own teaching and learning process. So my colleagues are going to share a link to our handout for today in just a moment. Please click to create a copy. This will now be your document to do with as you please. No one else will have access to it. We're going to give you about 5 minutes to complete exercise 1. We will not ask you to share what it is that you write, and we're going to start the timer and bring you all back together at the end of about 5 minutes. You may not feel that this is enough time to complete the exercise, and you are right. This is just to get you started. So do your best. Remember, no pressure. So the first thing we're going to think about is, what are your goals as an instructor? Maybe what are your goals for your students? Similar to the activity we showed you earlier, what, if any, major themes are standing out to you? So go ahead and get into the Zoom chat, copy that link, put it into your web browser. We're going to set a 5-minute timer here in Zoom. Respond to as many prompts as you can in exercise 1. After that 5 minutes has concluded, we'll bring you all back together. Okay, so time is up on that first one. So Julie was great and put in the chat a PDF version of the handout, also a link to make a copy of it. If for some reason you're still having trouble, let us know in the chat and we'll make sure you get a copy of it, okay? Okay, so let's take a look. If I were trying to address the prompt, what are the goals I have for myself and for my students? This is an example from another health educator. Perhaps my role, let me get my little annotation tool. Perhaps my role is to guide my students, right? Perhaps I want them to be critical thinkers. I want to make evidence-based practitioners. I want to do this because my field is constantly evolving, right? Encourage lifelong learning, engaging with the course material. I want them to be curious, right? So I'm narrowing in on those key words and qualities that we focused on brainstorming at the beginning of the session, and I'm writing out a narrative. It doesn't have to be perfect. We just have to get it down, right? Okay, so clear all my drawings. And again, we've got some examples here. This was pulled from one faculty member, and I love how she connected everything together. So the next thing, what activities or teaching methods do you use to achieve those goals? And what then, if any, major themes are standing out to you? So we're going to go back to that handout. And we're going to focus on exercise 2. I'll give you another couple of minutes. Let's set the timer. So we thought about our goals, right? We've thought about maybe the goals for the students or the goals for ourselves. We're going to take about 5 minutes and we're going to think about, how do we achieve those goals? What are we currently doing that shows us that we're doing, maybe we're using case-based learning, or maybe we're doing collaborative learning. Think about what it is you're actually doing in those educational settings, and then we'll come back together. Okay, time's up, pencils down, not to trigger any PTSD. So now let's go back to the example. If I were trying to address the prompt, how might I achieve my goals? Or how is it that what I'm doing is best setting me up for success to meet those goals? Let me go back to my little annotator because this thing's amazing. All right, so perhaps what I would do is I work through client cases. Maybe I ask my students to collaborate and problem solve through those cases. Creativity was something that was really important to me. So maybe I build a lot of creativity through those cases. And in order to really get to the heart of what we're learning, we need to do some discussion, right? They're going to get a lot of hands-on working with different clients. And again, the discussion with the peers comes through again because collaboration was so important to us, right? So I might also describe how I provide hands-on opportunities. Going back to the example, I'm doing that through my lab sessions. They're going to get a lot of hands-on practice with a variety of diagnoses. Maybe this population is super important to my particular course, and I'm going to build curiosity through meaningful application of the material. So really, it's just capturing what you're currently doing and doing it in a narrative form. So to take the temperature in the room, we invite you to use the nonverbal communication features in the reaction section of the Zoom. We did put a link in there if you're not quite sure how to do that, to the following question. How challenging did you find this writing exercise? Now, if you're lost, it's down towards the bottom part of your Zoom bar. You're going to see reactions here, and you can use any one of these. These little 3 dots open up some different options for you. And be creative. You might choose the green check if you followed along and you found it manageable, or the red X if you really were lost or you thought it was tricky. So I'm curious, how did we do with this one? Ooh, I got some happy faces. I think that's a surprised face. I hear you. Maybe some okay faces. Okay, a thumbs up. All right. Understandable. A laughing face. Awesome. Okay. So as I stated today, this is just the beginning, or perhaps it's a chance to revisit what you've already done or your reflections that you've already started. To help you build on that momentum, we have provided you with some tools to capture what it is you're doing, ways to check in with yourself and determine if the selections that you've made align with your beliefs about teaching and learning. The writing exercises we completed today were adapted directly from our blueprint, which is showing on the screen. We're going to share a link to the blueprint in the Zoom chat, and we invite you to use this resource, as well as reach out to our team to discuss any of their ideas or suggestions that you may want to brainstorm later. So our next session will take place in a week from today, and we're going to explore how and where to find different avenues for collecting that feedback, as well as how do you use that data to inform your practice. I really appreciate all of you for joining us today, being vulnerable, sharing your questions and your comments. If you want to reach out to us, we've put our contact on the screen. Yes, it's still showing. That QR code is a link to our consultations. If you want to do a consultation with us, an appointment with us, we invite you to do so. And we'll pause and ask, are there any questions or comments?